Right, welcome to Checkpoint, and today we're discussing Kenya's foreign dilemma. You did see that story by Asha Mulu a little earlier on, talking about the fallout from the ICC and some of the statements that have been made by politicians and indeed the president and the deputy as well. And tonight on Checkpoint, we have a brand new panel. Well, one is familiar, the others are not. TJ Kajwang, who's Member of Parliament in Nairobi here, and we have Professor Naituli and Senator Kipchumba Murkomen. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in our discussion tonight. Some of the statements that have been made recently, it's a lot of chest thumping, some say, others say it's time Kenya puts her foot down in the international community. Let's start with you, TJ Kajwang. What do you think?
Well, Yvonne, the ICC, it would appear to me, is one of those difficult discussions which we need to learn to have at some point, and very honestly and openly. And today it's good that you have brought people who are professionals, and Murkomen and I are lawyers. And so I want to suggest that in this discussion we'll first of all want to pronounce what the law is, and then we can now make interpretations and political pronouncement upon the law. But I'll tell you that I've had so many statements that have been going back and forth. Some of them leave me wondering where this ship called Kenya is going. Because I kind of get the feeling as a Kenyan that either in State House, somebody is not bold enough to tell the president what he should know. Or if he does so, then we have a president who refuses to hear completely. But because I know that there are a lot of professionals in State House, I shudder to think on how Kenya is gravitating. Because, Yvonne, foreign policy is one of those things that you open any law book in Kenya, first from the constitution down to any legislation, you meet it. Every country must be checked upon on its foreign relations, foreign policy, how it associates with the civilized men of other nations.
And how do you think we're doing so far?
We are doing very badly. Because for a long time since independence, Kenya has been known to have allies in the West. And we have had relations which it has not been easy, but it has kept us going.
Okay.
And every government is allowed to change policies the way they like. And I have seen Uhuru's government, starting from the later part of Kibaki's government, but now properly in Uhuru government, we have been really gravitating from the west towards the east, which is not bad.
Okay.
The only thing, Yvonne, which I want to say is this, that a shift such as that is such a huge thing which cannot be discussed in State House alone. It is something which must be shared on a national platform. And I want to suggest that because this is a national policy, I want to think that Uhuru's government would have made a foreign policy sessional paper and put it before the National Assembly, not quite the National Assembly, before Parliament, where there is the joint Senate and Parliament to discuss the issue of changing the shift from the west to the east, so that it becomes a policy that all of us as a nation share.
All right, and now that you brought in, both houses of Parliament, we'll get to you, Professor, in a moment. What are your thoughts? There have been some statements that have been made, including by yourself, that, seem like it's a bully. Of course, this is in reaction to what happened at the UN Security Council. And the big question that everybody asks is, was the West obliged to vote in favor of Kenya?
First of all, let me say that Kenya is at its best at the moment in terms of exerting its international presence. There's never been a time that Kenyans mobilized the whole of Africa to a particular decision like this.
But even then, you don't have the support of all of Africa.
Well,
at the Assembly of State Parties, Tanzania has been a bit...
Yeah, Tanzania is... I really doubt that ultimately Tanzania will break away, but you can count maybe even 5 countries to imagine, because I was in AU 2 times with the president, and the manner in which even African countries came in a short notice to come and discuss the Kenyan situation, to have a conference for only Kenyan situation with over 40 presidents. It means for the first time since Jomo Kenyatta and Kwame Nkrumah and the others in 1963 came up with the OAU, this is another opportunity for Africa to listen to Kenya, and it has demonstrated that we have maximum and high respect by African countries. And two, and I want you to follow this too, is that for the first time we have refused to remain in the back room, and we, for the first time, Kenyans are speaking publicly. Let me say this: when Kenyans voted for Uhuru Ruto, the vote itself was a defiance of a position taken by foreign countries. We saw ambassadors like the ambassador of Britain telling us that they will only have essential contact with Kenya. So basically, if there is any approach towards implementation of that essential contact, Britain should not blame us, because really what we have, when Kenyans voted for Uhuru and Ruto, they were actually making a statement on foreign policy that we are ready to defy every order, every scheme, every position that was taken publicly. It's only in Kenya, actually, and I have never seen, I stayed in Washington for a year, I went through these diplomatic circles, lobbying and so forth. I never saw a situation where a foreign country, even like Kenya, would pronounce to serve in elections in America. Never. But it's only in Kenya where Americans, British, and all that kind of... TJ Kajwang will tell you, public international law, all countries are equal, including Vanuatu. The treatment of every sovereign state is the same. And the principle of international law, and I want to be very clear on this, is the principle of reciprocity. Every country will treat the other neighbor in the manner in which they are being treated.
So in light of that, then the West should have voted in favor of Kenya?
They should have they should have kept, oh, you're saying about the UN decision.
Yes, because all of this sort of stems from that, doesn't it?
The fact that I am not so much into the question of whether they should have voted for Kenya or not, but the fact that they did not vote for Kenya, they never made a decision, either even to vote otherwise. You saw the wishy-washiness. But secondly, the pretense that they were giving that they're supporting Kenya, they support sovereignty. Countries like America, who are not even members of ICC, really.
But they're members of the UN Security Council, they're a permanent member of the UN.
What reason did they have not to vote for Kenya if they don't believe in ICC?
There are also other African countries that are not ICC member states and were present. So what role do they have in voting on the ICC?
Voted for us.
Well, even those
let me add the last statement about the same. Is that when you think about UN Security Council, anyone, of course, who has studied public international law or international politics will be that the worst form of democracy is the UN Security Council, where a decision by over 180 countries is vetoed by 5 countries. And you have to go back to the history of why UN was formed in 1945, who formed it, why did they reserve powers for themselves. So it is not even the best institution in terms of discussing anything to do with democracy.
All right, let's bring in Professor. Do you think Kenya is being a bully on the world scene?
No, I would like to debug one thing he said there, that all the countries are equal. I want to talk much more that they are not equal. you never hear France telling us they are an independent country, or America saying that we are independent. We say that because we know we are not. Kenya is not being a bully.
We say?
Why we shout our independence all the time? It's because we know we are not.
It's because you think we're not independent.
That's right.
Keep shouting that.
How long? When did you ever hear France saying that it's independent? Or America? Britain?
America every day.
Okay.
Every state of the nation address has the argument that this is a United States of America, an independent country.
Having said that, I don't really think Kenya is a bully, and what I see myself is a small hiccup here. We are overexcited about our assertiveness, which is actually not even there, the assertiveness that we are talking about, because we have, assertiveness is seen through an impact. What you are able to generate. We haven't been able to generate anything right now. We are just talking and shouting very hard. And that means we don't have enough confidence in ourselves, because we shouldn't be shouting at all. Kibaki, the former president, he did a fantastic job here. He quietly, without making noise, shifted to where the country benefited the most. He showed the contract to the Chinese, on the contract, because they are cheaper than our traditional partners. I think it's clever if we continue that way. We don't have to declare enemies because we don't need them. We don't need the enemies.
Yeah,
now, we don't also have to think that we can disagree with our friends. Mm-hmm. We can disagree with our friends, and we still continue being friends. So what I see is there is an overexcitation, and then there is also something bordering on immaturity on our part. Mm-hmm. These people, whether they vote for us or they don't vote for us, will continue with our agenda. We will continue. Whether they support us or they don't support us, we'll continue with our agenda. We need to continue with that agenda.
Well, let me just put my head to it. First of all, I cannot allow what my very good friend Murkonen has said to go without the other opinion to it. Kenyans arguably voted, rebelled against the West, so to speak, as it says. Yes. That vote was 50-50 if you think about it. Well, it was 51 and 49. Now, I'm thinking that the rest of that 49 vote were also expressing an opinion. I have nothing at all with Kenyan shifting its position. But Kenyans that I represent want to know what is the Uhuru's foreign policy. For us to know Uhuru's foreign policy, somebody said it here before, that foreign policy is a product of the domestic policy. So let us have a conversation, a national conversation, and let us agree, as Professor is making it, that things are cheaper somewhere, or it is better to go somewhere. But let us go in a structured way in which we offer national forum conference, in which we say that this is therefore our foreign policy from now on.
Professor?
I'm rejecting the assumption that there is a shift, because I have not seen a shift in the foreign policy. The fact that these people in ICC, I mean in the voting, took place and they abstained,
yes.
And we don't like that, it doesn't mean we have shifted. So there is really
we're certainly talking about it
but
a lot.
We are not close to any of those embassies. Yeah. We are still dealing with these people. We are still meeting them.
But then,
the Vice President,
actually, when you talk and when you do talk about embassies as well, 6 ambassadors, by the way, are still awaiting accreditation by the President. France, Italy, and Germany among them. And of course, it's been due to the President's busy schedule, so we understand, Senator?
I was just trying to say, I don't know where Professor lives, because in Kenya, if you want to know what's a foreign policy of any leader, you have to look at his first statements. So the first speech for the President during the inauguration spend more time saying what his foreign policy was going to be. Just go back to Uhuru's speech. There was emphasis on about Africa, about working with the African countries and looking for friends who are willing to support us. Two, Kajwang said a very true statement that if you want to know through policy of a country, you look at the domestic policy. Mm-hmm. Our domestic policy is in the Vision 2030. How we achieve that Vision 2030 over time, we have been working with the West, with the East, in terms of, as Professor said, the contracts and so forth and so forth. So there is if you don't say even a shift, there is a tilt towards first Africanization. Right. And remember our best markets in Africa, emphasizing and deepening those ties. Two, is that there is the issue of now looking at the East. But we have said it very clearly in our statement, including even in the Manifesto of Jubilee, that while continuing with our traditional partners, we will also look and deepen relationships.
But Jubilee is not government. That is where I have a problem. Jubilee is not a government. It is just a coalition which appears to be the majority. Now,
which is the majority?
The question should be, in a presidential system, I beg to disagree. In a presidential system, there is an executive, and there is a legislature. I would expect that if that may be the disposition of the executive, that outlook must be shared with all the arms of government, particularly the legislature.
Okay, all right. And you know, you mentioned something interesting, Senator, where you said, we must continue to explore other avenues. Yes. But do you think some of the statements made by yourself included about the West help with this situation that we've got? We've got statements being made that the British Army troops who are training in Laikipia can go. We've also had another statement made by a member of parliament in Jubilee that, oh, by the way, KDF was was going to Somalia because, a French national was, and this had nothing to do with us, forgetting the fact that we have also experienced attacks in Italy and other parts. Do you think, though, some of the statements that have been made by Jubilee politicians help in this matter? Because it's
basically,
some heavy rhetoric.
It's part of the public discourse. It's part of the debate. And you cannot delink. Kenyans, why would terrorists target Kenyans? It's not because of just Kenyan interest. You've seen over time, they started with targeting foreign interest in Kenya. So to a great extent, we are co-joined in the world.
Senator, do you think then if we cut ties with the West, that
nobody has
the attacks will cease and that Kenya will be a safe spot?
I think it's wrong to imagine that anyone has announced that we should cut ties. People have said, the argument that most of our supporters have said is that we need to deepen relationship with friends who are willing to work with us.
But when we call certain people hostile nations...
It doesn't mean to... No, hostile nations is too far. If you know international law, I mean, going to... I don't know why even people were discussing closing embassies, hostile nations...
Then they say...
But hostile nations is a statement that came from
But if you have friends, we are four here, and one of your friends spends more time with you, he wants to assist you, I mean, you will keep the other friend for when there is need. But the friend who is working with you at the moment, you deepen that relationship.
And the other one you'll call hostile, Senator?
I think this whole debate is missing the point completely. We have been for 50 years very much aligned to the West. We actually have nothing to show for it. For those 50 years. You walk out here in the last 7 years, you can see that we have made progress in infrastructure development, but not really with the West, with the East. Now, having said that, let me also say that we are making another mistake. We are confusing two issues here. There is government-to-government relations, which is what is happening with the East. Our relations with the West is so deep that it's personal, it's institutional. Individual groups making ties with the Westerners, okay, because of the long term. Now, I can tell you why I'm saying this is emotional, because dismantling those deep-rooted is not easy, and nobody will try it. Believe me, nobody will try it. What is happening is the politicians are overexcited about this issue. The president isn't, and his deputy are not. And these two people are going to mend the relation eventually. And this ICC thing is going to pass. And eventually, we are just going to have our friends in Asia, and we'll also have our friends in the West. Because it's very easy, very difficult to disrupt those deep-rooted ties. It just cannot be done.
But I thought we are discussing... You're asking things, utterances that have been made, and you're asking whether they really help. Fortunately, Professor, I'm not one of those who are excited. My friend, maybe. But you witnessed, I saw something which was just out of the world, that somebody calling himself a deputy governor would go in a public, in a meeting that has been organized by diplomatic community and pretend to have some powers which he clearly doesn't have. Even his own governor doesn't have. Then walks into an hotel and flashes out a diplomat. I mean, this is just insane. Because in civilized nations, this fellow should be cooling his heels in some solitary confinement somewhere.
Senator?
Well, you want me to respond to the... No, before even I respond to that, there are some things that Professor is speaking about. We are discussing here diplomatic ties, but cultural and other ties between African countries and other countries will continue, even individuals. By the way, Americans are not as bad as their government. They have also issues with their government. Britain is not as bad. British people are not as bad as their government. They have issues with their government. So even us as a country, we must be able and have the right to express our displeasure with a government that is not willing to work with us. But that does not mean that we hate people who are white or people who come from those countries. And therefore, going to the point of Kajwang, I found the Eldoret issue, I mean, we must contextualize it. One, there has been this continuous belief that, you know, in the past, people never had a problem with Western people. They believed that people coming from abroad were coming for development and so forth. But since these stories of coaching witnesses came to public, everybody remained suspicious. And we must contextualize the Eldoret one because, and this is important, journalists wanted to cover the story. So they wanted to go in. And they were told, you can't come to this meeting. And then there were some characters in town who are known to have certain behaviors who are sitting inside the meeting. So people became suspicious. It's at that instant that they called the deputy governor who came in and did what he did. I agree with TJ. I agree with TJ that they don't have the power to do that.
You must believe.
I agree with me. I agree with him entirely on that, because they don't have power of. I don't want us to imagine that counties are going to require us to carry visas or diplomatic office, where when someone comes from abroad, you come and report to a governor. That's not true. It's not there. I think what Chebno did, the deputy governor did it in his individual capacity, not as a representative of the county government, although you cannot delink the two anyway, but he did not do it as empowered by law, but basically as a citizen who was concerned about the.
But he did it by powers from above.
I don't agree with that.
He said he was acting on instructions.
Maybe by his governor, we are not sure. Because he's above by law.
No, he's helping to contextualize the problem, and this is not the correct thing. The information we have, unless he has some information that we don't.
So I have
the information we have is that a deputy governor walks into in a meeting and flashes out people.
Yes.
All right. Before we go into the context, let's say, what does the law say? Can a governor, can even the president himself come into where people are, and a diplomat who is protected by Privileges and Immunities Act throws out people like that shamelessly? But I think what we want to discuss is that, as Professor is saying, we have just got too excited that we are going to do so many things that will hurt us, and which will hurt people of Kenya who just wake up in the morning to be able to get some food on the table.
And actually,
but TJ, imagine in Washington DC or in London, there was some funny character sitting in a particular room, and some locals. Do you think they would have contained it?
Are we calling?
My point is this:
funny characters is a term that might rub some people the wrong way.
I'm just imagining that there are some people from Africa who are supposed to do other work, and they are busy, and there is a fear of terrorism, issues of. I'm just imagining, and then you think the government will just let them go?
Because
the point I want us to take home from the Eldoret incident, beyond just the powers of a governor and deputy governor, is that the Kenyans are a little bit more cautious now when it deals with people from the West, and particularly from that region. If you look at that context, there is a growing level of intolerance, which is not excitement, and it's something that we must go deep into it and discuss and ask ourselves, why are people who have stayed with the British for a long time feeling now intolerant to officials of government from that country? We must answer that question than just to imagine and wish it out and say it's just a question of excitement.
Yeah, but I would want to hear from Professor now that I've met him here, because you see, there are two things which I see, Yvonne. Number one is that we have been complaining about travel advisories.
Yes.
And when they do their travel advisories, we jump up and we are very, very angry. And here you are flashing out people, and you expect them to tell their people that, oh, Kenya is safe, you come, but then
when they do?
Yes, they flash you out. Secondly, the view of ICC is that there are some communities that have become very so polarized that there are other people, some people from some other quarters that are not wanted. My view was that that picture really helped to explain a position which is not true, that there are some places that some people are not supposed to go, which in my view was so unnecessary. It in actual fact blew in the face of the ICC predictors.
Okay, all right. Yes, Professor, and while you're doing that, because we're running out of time, even as you discuss that, let's talk about, our traditional trade partners. And I know we have a bit of a graphic to just show you who we traditionally deal with. This is from Asha Mulu's story that she did a little earlier. And at the end of the day, is the Kenyan likely to suffer if we have a shift in our diplomacy, in the persons that we trade with? If we can just take a look at that, you see that on air, who are major, who we export to majorly. And if you notice, the people we are talking about facing east, we import most and export very little to the east. Yes,
because our export mainly goes to our East African brothers.
Yes.
And
but
then
UK,
the other one go to UK and
yes,
Netherlands,
the
and then the US. They are the exports, and we buy more from the east.
Yes.
This is why we need to be really cautious in dealing with this matter, because the foreign policy should be driven by our national interest. And our national interest, if we fail to balance, then we may actually throw to the balance in a way that we may not be able to recover. I was just about to say that usually leadership is tested under pressure in difficult circumstances like the ones we find ourselves in our country. It is extremely difficult when our president and his deputy are facing criminal charges. It's not a nice thing. And this is why decorum and decency is required when we are dealing with the foreigners, even those who don't like us. We need to be very decent in dealing with them. We know they don't like us, but we don't have to go out of our way to demonstrate that we are enemies. We need to know that and then deal with them with the total decorum. That is how we earn respect.
Professor, even as we close, should politicians be talking about diplomacy?
No, most of
should
them
we be having members of parliament and senators here discussing issues?
This is why I'm saying, the things we have heard from the politicians, we have actually not heard them from the president who is in deputy. We haven't. So the politicians are reading from, in my opinion, different script. And I will surprise you, in the next 3-4 years, we will just go back where we have been with our development partners, whether they are from Asia or from the rest. This, what we are seeing here, will dissipate. With time, it will dissipate. Because like I said again, our ties with our friends, they are just too deep to just go away.
Okay.
They want to go away.
Okay, as we close, Senator, we recall, and I know you will say that, you know, because they became elected president and deputy, but many would say that this is not, diplomacy is usually in the country's national interest.
Yeah.
But many would say that this shift to the east and to the west is due to ICC and is due to the cases facing the deputy and the president. Are they using this for their own personal interests and not necessarily for the national interest? Meaning, are we facing east just so that the president and the deputy can save themselves from the ICC?
Not necessarily. It's basically, there is a principle in law that's called presumption of innocence. I think the issue of if the West dealt with the president and deputy from the presumption of innocence perspective, we would not be having.
So you think they think they're guilty? Are they treating them with the presumption of innocence?
They told us they will do minimum contact. They told us it's in public domain. We should not make this discussion as if it started with the Kenyans. It started with the diplomats from. I mean, you saw the German ambassador, you saw the British ambassador,
talking about the choices having consequences
and so forth. So if we make our choices for the East, it also has consequences. Again, I don't want to agree with Prof that. I agree with him that ties keep changing, and I cannot predict it will go where. Diplomacy is not permanent. I mean, you can have. That's why if you read books, you read that the diplomacy of American President X.
Okay.
How would he
all right,
face
Senator, I'm sorry to cut you short. We're running out of time,
okay,
and so
just
hang on one sec. The question then: are they doing this to save themselves from the ICC?
No.
So this is for the country's interest.
The shift is started with the President Kibaki.
Okay.
The shift is started with the Kibaki.
But more quietly than
yes,
now.
Let me answer your question.
Yes.
Let me answer your question.
Yes,
what
very
was
quickly, please.
purely a personal issue of Uhuru, Ruto, and the rest has now become a national issue just because these people have become presidents. And what you are seeing and all these political shifts that you are seeing are shifts so that we maintain our political powers. They have nothing to do with what the local Mwananchi wants to put on the table, because if that was the case, they would have hearken to what Professor is saying. Let us see where we import from, let us see where we export from, and let us see where at the end of the day we make most of our money.
Okay, all right. On that note, we have to end it. Thank you all for coming, and thank you so much for that. It's been Checkpoint. Thank you for your comments. Let's take a short break now. We'll be back with more news.